Hello, I'm Nick Clark. This is Count at the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, coal. Two nations taking different approaches to carbon emissions. Despite unprecedented bushfires, Australia pushes ahead with a controversial coal project. We're on the ground with the community that stands to benefit from the country's biggest mine. Germany plans to eliminate coal-powered stations, but the government's accused of breaking its promises to replace coal with more environmentally friendly sources of electricity. And shipping, the unseen polluter, an industry crucial to the global economy, moving goods worth trillions of dollars across our seas. What's the industry doing to reduce its emissions? So then, global carbon dioxide emissions, harmful gases behind global warming and climate change, held steady for the first time in 3 years in 2019. The International Energy Agency says that was thanks to a switch from coal power to renewables in advanced economies. The United Nations estimates that the world needs to reduce coal-fired electricity by 2/3 in the next decade to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Right now, our pursuit of coal is just unrelenting. Data from ncoal.org shows that more than $50 billion worth is being ploughed into coal-powered projects right around the world. China alone is contributing almost $40 billion in financing projects from the United States to Australia. And rather than scaling back on coal-powered electricity, over the last 2 years, China has added 43 gigawatts of capacity. That's as much power produced by Germany's coal generators. Also noteworthy from the financial data, although Germany has said it would eliminate its coal power stations, it's spending more than $1 billion on projects from Greece to India. So this week we have correspondents in Germany and Australia to file films on Berlin's ambitions to do away with coal power and Australia's full throttle approach to exporting coal to other nations. And that's where we're going to start. Bear in mind, if you were to include all of its exports of coal, gas and oil, Australia, which is a nation of 20 million people, would be responsible for 5% of the world's carbon emissions. Al Jazeera's Alexia Bryan went to see a controversial mine which is being financed by the Indian conglomerate Adani.
Claremont, population 3,000, and one of Australia's mining heartlands. Most of the work here is in coal or farming, and they keep Paul Wilkes' motel business going as well.
Possibly 70% of our business would be coal related in one way or another. Whether it be the shoe salesman or the shampoo salesman or the fuel salesman. We've got companies that do a lot of engineering work that are independent of the mines. They come and stay.
Dozens of mines surround remote towns like Claremont, which lies 1,000 kilometres north of Brisbane, and Moranbah, just up the road.
Keeps the community alive, definitely helps with all the business, local business, especially helps with your mum, like someone young like my daughter as well. Just got them a real future for them.
Claremont's the closest town to the controversial Carmichael mine, and it's still 160 kilometres away. The mine's owned by the Indian company Adani and got the go-ahead from the government last year after more than a decade. There have been hold-ups over environmental approvals and funding problems, so the mine's been scaled back from its initial plans. However, it'll still be among Australia's biggest, exporting at least 10 million tonnes of coal a year. This is the workers' camp for the mine, which is under construction just a few kilometres away. We weren't allowed to film inside, and Adani wouldn't talk to us on camera for this story. The mine lies here in the Galilee Basin, which is home to one of the biggest coal deposits in the world. There are fears the mine could push an endangered bird species towards extinction, while the land also holds spiritual significance for some Indigenous groups. Adani will be the first mine in the basin, and that's made it a flashpoint for protests.
It's madness to actually that it's got this far in this day and age with what we know about climate change, and opening up one of the world's biggest new coal deposits. Yeah, as I said, madness. Shouldn't happen.
The mining industry and the role of fossil fuels in the climate crisis have been in the spotlight in Australia after months of devastating bushfires and years of drought. And there are concerns the Adani mine could hurt the Great Barrier Reef, where the coral is already being killed by rising ocean temperatures.
There is some great coral still to be seen. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that you come to the Whitsundays, there's nothing. But the reality is there has been huge tracts of coral that have gone. And so I think what they're asking us to do is still pretend it's business as usual, which it certainly isn't. And we do have to find that the Adani mine going ahead with global warming like it is the worst possible outcome, because we could bleach tomorrow.
Australia is the world's biggest exporter of coal, and when the mine opens, millions more tonnes will be shipped to India from a port near the reef. The government is accused of not doing enough to protect the planet or reduce emissions. The UN says Australia isn't on target to meet its commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. And last year, its delegation was blamed for holding up negotiations at the climate summit in Madrid.
I was a deputy, so I was in charge of the crew.
Third-generation coal miner and local union chief Steve Smythe says his members are open to change, but it's got to be realistic.
If they expect miners and their families and communities to come along on this journey, then they've got to provide something more than what they're providing now, which is just rhetoric and words. And the fact that people are not convinced that the renewable sector can provide the same type of employment, same ongoing job security, and a future for both them and their kids.
The Adani mine could be exporting its first coal as soon as next year. In the meantime, Australia remains deeply divided over whether mines are purely sources of money and opportunity or scars on the landscape that take more than they provide. Alexia O'Brien, Al Jazeera, Queensland, Australia.
The Garzweiler mine has been here for decades, producing lignite or brown coal to fuel the nearby power station, which produces more energy than any other in Germany, a symbol of the country's continuing dependence on fossil fuels. In 2019, brown coal and hard coal, or anthracite, provided more than 29% of the electricity used. Nuclear provided 14%. Renewables accounted for 46%. But ministers are committed to combating climate change by reducing emissions and spent much of the last year deep in discussions about how to meet those commitments. Eventually they found a compromise whereby both forms of coal will be phased out within the next 18 years.
These were tough negotiations. They took a long time, in my view too long. But you can see the result. We're the first country with a binding agreement to exit coal and nuclear power. And that's an important signal internationally.
Felix Martes was a member of the commission which advised the government to prioritise a steady phasing out of coal. He says they've not taken that advice and broken their promises in doing so.
They violated this recommendation of the steady phase out. The pathway at the moment is to wait until the year 2030 and to wait until the year 2038 and shut down the major share of the lignite plants shortly before these deadlines.
One of the consequences of that will perhaps be felt most here, Berverad, just down the road from Garzweiler. With the mine's immediate future guaranteed, its owners want to expand it by buying the properties in Berverad, relocating the residents, and then destroying the houses to mine the coal underneath. Already some people here have taken the money and moved out, but not Britta Cox, whose family has lived here for 6 generations. She is fighting to stay.
We need to go back onto the streets. We must show people, above all, we must show politicians, that what they're planning to do is absolutely mad. We must show them that we won't put up with it.
Ministers are clear that mines like these will one day disappear and that renewable sources of energy are the answer. The trouble for the people living round here is their communities will have to go first, and all despite the government's stated commitment to a green future. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Garzweiler.
Well, joining us now from Berlin is Kai Neibert. He's president of the German League for Nature, Animal and Environment Protection. Mr. Neibert, welcome to the programme. First of all, what do you make of this levelling off of emissions in 2019? Is it just a blip? Are we going to be back this year to more burgeoning emissions?
I think at the moment we're in a very critical phase from a climate perspective. We can see that there is something happening in the international economy, going more deeply into the change in transport sector, going more deeply into changes in electricity sector. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why the carbon dioxide emissions are not rising as much anymore as they have been done in the last years.
And although there are certain changes with more economies, leading towards renewables, yet we have $50 billion being pushed towards new coal-fired production.
Yeah, and we still have $500 billion each year that are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. That's the big problem at the moment. We are entering a new era where renewables should be on the rise, but we are still subsidizing and financing the fossil sector. So that's the big disruption we have at the moment.
Right, and let's talk about specific countries. Where you are, first of all, in Germany. It's all talk, isn't it? Saying the right thing at home while pumping, what is it, $1 billion in coal projects in Greece and in India.
Yeah, that's true. Germany has had a big social debate about the coal phase-out, and we had a big commission last year that decided the roadmap for the coal phase-out. So from a political point of view, the roadmap is clear now. But if you look into the investments of different industries in Germany, they are still investing in the fossil fuel sector. And that's a big issue. It's not a coherent strategy that can be seen there. It's still the old system fighting against the new system.
The thing is, coal phase-out, it trips off the tongue nicely, doesn't it? It's easy to say, but it's difficult to implement, especially in a country like Germany, where the unions are so strong, and that causes problems for politicians who are trying to get re-elected, but also for people who just want jobs.
And that's completely right, especially in countries like China or Germany that are highly dependent on the coal industry. It's hard for the politics to find the way out. That's why we had this big commission, because the parliament obviously wasn't able to set this roadmap. But in this commission, I've been part of the commission, we found a roadmap together with the energy industry, the unions and the environmental organizations. And here the thing is clear. If you look at the numbers in Germany, we have 300,000 jobs in the renewables and only 20,000 left in the coal industry. So the new sector, the new jobs are already there. We just need to bring the people from left to right, from the fossil to the renewable sector.
You've talked about China. What is the situation there? Because it's a little unclear. You hear on the one hand that they're investing heavily in renewables, and yet on the other, they too are investing massively in new coal projects.
That's absolutely right. That's one of the big contradictions in China. In China, they are building as much windmills at the moment every day like Germany is building in a year. So it's the hugest rise in net rise in China that we have in the renewable sector. But they are still building new coal power plants. There again, they have big problems with heating their economy. So they think they are still dependent on the coal industry, but also in China. In China, like in Germany, it's not a question of environmentalism anymore. If you look at Germany, the price for wind, from electricity from wind is the cheapest one compared to coal or nuclear. And that's the same in China. So in the end, it will become an economic question to go to the renewables or not.
Right. Well, there's a lot of smart economists around, so why isn't it already happening?
Yeah, in Germany, interestingly, it is already happening. We have some politicians that try to bring up the debate about nuclear energy again. And you know who's stopping this debate? It's the energy sector. It's the CEOs of the energy business who say, why should I invest in an industry where 1 kilowatt hour of electricity costs 20 cents? Nuclear energy, when I have a different industry where it's 3.5 cents, the wind industry.
You mentioned the nuclear industry. What about that? Because it's cleanest of them all, isn't it? And despite what many people think, relatively safe.
That's one of the most common misconceptions, that nuclear energy is a clean energy. Despite the whole thing of where to put the old nuclear material and to store it safely, look at it from an economic perspective. If you have to pay the whole insurance for 1 kilowatt hour of nuclear power, then the price would explode. Then you have 35 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour, and wind is 10. So wind is not only more carbon neutral, because it takes much less carbon dioxide to produce 1 kilowatt hour of wind electricity than 1 kilowatt hour of nuclear, but it's more cheaper as well. So there is no reason at all to stay in the nuclear sector or to stay in the fossil sector. We are in a big transition at the moment, and this will be decided by economy.
Okay, finally, let's move to Australia, a country facing its own particular climate question with the recent bushfires that raged, the wildfires that raged there. They too investing heavily in coal, but there's a growing movement against it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I've been to Australia in 2011, where they had a big debate about financing the renewables and taxing the carbon sector a bit more, but they haven't gone so far. But in Australia, it's really ridiculous. They have few people in a country, in a whole continent with a lot of sun above it. So for them, it's clear that they should invest massively in the solar sector. But there again, the money still is in the old sector. So the old sector is the political powerful sector. And the question is how to push this money to the renewable sector. In Germany, we have done so far. I just was congratulated from a colleague in Sweden who asked me to hand over the wishes from Sweden to the German taxpayers who made the renewables competitive. And Australia will face the same situation in the next years as well.
Interesting. All right, we'll leave it there. Kai Niver, great to get your perspective. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's keep this theme about climate change going by looking at the shipping industry. 90% of world trade is undertaken by shipping, with an estimated $4 trillion worth of goods being moved every year. So, hugely important and something we really can't do without. Well, the European Union believes unchecked, the industry could contribute to a fifth of emissions by the year 2050. Presently, shipping accounts for about 3% of global emissions, and it may surprise you that, like the aviation industry, shipping is not part of the Paris Agreement. That doesn't mean the sector isn't taking its responsibilities seriously. It has to, because it's facing protests like these ones against pollution by vessels in the Arctic. Interestingly, shipping fuel is produced from a heavier grade of oil that's more polluting and is banned from use in Antarctica. There are initiatives underway, like the one I reported on in Norway, where batteries are being used to help power ships. And there are others who've considered wind power, but turning around an industry that invests hundreds of millions of dollars in ships is quite literally like turning around a supertanker. And just to give you a sense of the problem, the scale of it, this is a live map produced by marinetraffic.com of all the vessels on all the oceans right now. Tens of thousands of them, pretty much every single one of them powered by fossil fuels and belching out CO2 into the atmosphere. The scale is just staggering. Well, joining me now from London is Gavin Allwright, and Gavin is the Secretary of the International Windship Association. Gavin, welcome to the programme. It is the unseen source, the great unseen source of emissions around the world, shipping, isn't it? Just how much of a problem is it?
Well, thank you for having me on the programme. Yeah, it is an unseen polluter, shipping. You know, if we look at the greenhouse gas emissions from shipping, it's around about 2 to 3% of the world total. Now, that might not sound a lot, but that's pretty much the equivalent of, say, Germany or even more than the UK. On the other pollutants, sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides, particulate matter, black carbon, it's significantly higher than that. And of course, this pollution is happening pretty much of the time out in the deep sea, away from prying eyes of the public.
That's right, and it also presents it presents a problem in ports, doesn't it? Especially those more noxious, toxic gases you're talking about.
Yeah, no, it does. It does, and we're looking at probably tens of thousands of premature deaths caused by this type of pollution, hundreds of thousands of respiratory events. But also, shipping does move about 90% of world trade, and actually is probably the most efficient of all the modes of transport.
Right, and that's the thing, isn't it? We need ships at sea to bring all the goods that we want in our homes. Tell us about the efforts that the shipping industry is making, bringing in low sulfur fuels, for example. And,
there is actually a carriage ban on the heavy fuel oil, which is quite toxic. If you don't have an exhaust gas cleaning system installed on the vessel, you have to use very, very low sulfur fuel or diesel. And other efforts, actually, the shipping industry was excluded from the Paris Agreement along with aviation on greenhouse gas. But actually in April 2018, passed an initial strategy that looked at least 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050. And that's a pretty dramatic change. Is it deep enough? Is it quick enough? Probably not. But with the at least there, we can ratchet up the ambition.
All right, well, there's a definite requirement for alternatives, which is what you're here primarily to talk about, specifically wind. But are we really going to go back to the days of sail?
Well, yes and no. No in the sense of, are we going backwards? No, I don't think we are going backwards. I think we're going forwards. We're talking about 21st century solutions here, highly automated, using up-to-date materials. And yes, in the sense that we're going to be using wind again on large commercial vessels. We already have 10 vessels out there in the world fleet, demonstrating various different types of technology. There's over 7 categories of wind propulsion technology, 35 plus providers of those solutions as well. And the industry is waking up to this because of the savings in fuel and therefore emissions that wind can actually deliver, between 5 to 20% already for a retrofitted wind assist system, potentially up to 30%. And then if you go to primary wind, where you're using wind as your main propulsor, significantly higher.
Right, and tell me how that might work. I mean, what does it mean? You just stick a sail on a container ship? How does it work?
It's a really good question, and we generally talk about wind propulsion rather than sails because there are categories there that you wouldn't normally identify as a sail. But yes, you can place retrofitted systems onto virtually all segments of the industry, from tankers, bulkers, as you mentioned, container ships, which are a little bit challenging because of the lack of deck space on those. But we have off-deck systems like kites that can be used there. And of course, if you want to get your maximum bang for your buck, if you like, then with new builds where you can optimize the vessel to get the best out of wind, then you're going to get those significantly higher savings.
Gavin, with respect, it all sounds like it's a long way down the road. How close is it really?
Well, it's a little bit, if you look at this segment, a little bit like a change in the direction of a super tanker. It takes a long time to get that turn in. However, once the turn is initiated, it gains in momentum. And as I mentioned before, we already have 10 large vessels with wind propulsion installed on those, including there's a Maersk tanker out there. We have VLCCs, which are very large crude carriers. We're talking some of the largest ships in the world are already installed with these. And one project alone, there's an EU-funded project called the WASP project, Wind Assisted Ship Propulsion. That will be delivering a further 5 installations over the next 12 to 18 months. So we're starting to see, I would say we're on the launch pad, the countdown is there, and we're starting to see uptake and the involvement of some very large players. For example, as I mentioned, Maersk, Viking Lines, Scand Lines. We have Mitsubishi Ost Lines, which is the largest shipping company in Japan, K Lines, and even non-shipping actors are getting involved. For example, Renault, the Renault Group, the Ariane Group, Vale, and so on.
Fascinating. A glimpse into the future. Gavin, all right, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
And that is our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything you've seen, you can tweet me at Nick Clark. Al Jazz is the address, and just use the hashtag AJCTC, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. And of course, there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC, and that will take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. I'm Nick Clark on Counting the Cost. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is coming right up.